Welcome back to the channel. My name is Justin. This is Pete. And we are back for another movie recommendations, what I watched video. I did one of these last month. You guys seem to enjoy it. I like doing them. It's a good way for me to let you know about titles that you may have heard of, but you're not sure if you want to devote the time to them or if you should skip them all together. I'm here for you guys. Me and Pete are here for you. So let's just get into it. I'm actually re-recording this video because the last version of this video that I did was super long and a little unfocused. I wanted to come back and just kind of rein it in a little bit because I get to rambling every once in a while, and that's okay. That's who I am. That's just me, but I need to rein it in a little bit. So, and if you could do me a giant favor and like this video, it helps me a lot, and it also helps YouTube give you the type of videos you want to see in your suggested and recommended feed. So it's always a good idea to like the videos that you watch, and if you end up digging this content or liking my other videos, subscribe. That helps out too. Thank you so much. So I'm going to be using Letterboxd. If you guys are not familiar with Letterboxd, it's a really cool app. It's basically an app community thing where you can follow other movie fans, you can log your movies, leave reviews, make recommendations, and all that type of stuff. So that's what I've logged my movies with, and we're just gonna jump right into it. All right, so to start it off, November 1st, I watched Fright Night, the remake. To those of you who have seen Fright Night, I'm really curious as to what you think of this remake. It did get a pretty good budget. We had a big star with Colin Farrell. What's her name from Hereditary? I'm forgetting her name right now. I'll put her right here. She plays the mom in the movie. The performances are really good. There's some good casting. Anton Yelchin is really just a fantastic actress. actor. Sorry. A fantastic actor. McLovin's in this as Evil Ed.
I am McLovin.
It really had potential as far as budget and actors, but ultimately felt really uninteresting to me. Kind of a squandered idea. And then for some reason, me and a buddy of mine who I was watching these movies with wanted to watch both of the remakes. I don't know why. I found this one, Fright Night 2, actually at a Dollar Tree for $1, so I picked the Blu-ray up for $1. I wouldn't recommend it at all unless you are just insanely bored and you want to just mindlessly watch something while looking at your phone. This movie doesn't offer anything original or new or a fresh take on the genre or an inspiring sequel. It's completely detached from even the Fright Night remake. It's just ultimately really boring. Aside from some really sexy chicks in it, there's nothing interesting about this movie. Okay, I just turned my heater off, so if you can hear the vent, I apologize about that. It should be turning off in a second. I always forget to turn that off. Next up, a movie I did quite enjoy, and I actually did a review right here, a pretty in-depth review of this, and so I won't talk a whole lot about it, but The Mortuary Collection is a Shudder exclusive, and it was actually a really entertaining anthology movie. I actually really enjoyed this one. It starred Clancy Brown. Not too many other performers that you'd recognize, but this movie was done by a really passionate director who had this idea in his head, and he did an Indiegogo. It's kind of a cool story about him really going for it to make his movie, but ultimately he did a lot with a small budget and really made some super fun and effective segments within this anthology series. A lot of anthologies can fall victim to having weak segments or too many segments. This avoids that pitfall by being really concise with just a handful of segments that are all well produced. None of them seem undercooked or better than the others, in my personal opinion. I really enjoyed The Mortuary Collection. Definitely check that one out. Next up, The Proposition. Now, this movie was a real surprise. I actually heard about this. If you guys listen to the Slash Filmcast, it's a really good movie review, movie podcast, and this one was brought up on that podcast. And I'm glad I checked it out because it was really cool. I do like Westerns. They're not my #1 favorite genre, but I do enjoy them. And this one was different than just a straight Western genre movie. There's some kind of trippy, surrealistic elements to it. It's pretty violent at times. It's a really cool story about a guy who, him and his brother, have been held captive. There's some escaped convicts, and the guy who captured him basically says, hey man, I'll let your brother go. He can escape this, and you guys can do whatever you want. If you fucking go kill this other guy for me, I'll let you guys live a life. So he takes him up on his proposition, and off the movie goes, and it was actually really cool. It was written by Nick Cave, if you're familiar with Nick Cave. Pretty interesting dude, so I would recommend The Proposition. Next up, Trick or Treat. I'm sure most of you guys following this channel are familiar with Trick or Treat. It's one of the best horror anthologies ever made. It's fantastic. Really captures that Halloween feel. I've seen this movie countless times, but I did a rewatch in the early days of November. I can't say enough good things about Trick or Treat. I hope we get a sequel. I know Mike Doherty is down to do it. If the powers that be give him the budget and let him go for it, I know he wants to do a sequel, so I really hope that happens. Blood Vessel. This was another Shudder exclusive, I believe. Now, this one I can't recommend. You'll see I gave it 2 stars. Ultimately, this movie left a lot to be desired. It had started with a really cool premise about these guys who are on a life raft, who are floating at sea, a bunch of kind of eclectic characters, and they stumble across this big, massive ship. And once they get on the ship, they realize that something terrible has happened because the crew's dead. There's weird, like, shit growing on the walls, and it's a little mystery, like, what the hell goes on. But once you kind of figure out what goes on, the whole movie kind of reveals itself, and then it just falls into like action tropes towards the end of the movie. They show, you can see like there's a monster on the poster, so I don't think I'm giving a whole lot away, but they show the monster a lot, almost to the point where it loses its effect and almost becomes kind of funny by the end of the movie. Not that the makeup effects weren't great, the creature effects looked great, but once you show the character and he's like just walking around and you just see him, I don't know, it was just a little goofy for me, but the premise was really cool. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend Blood Vessel. Next up, The Queen's Gambit. Now this is a mini series on Netflix. Whether or not you're a chess fan or not, whether you play chess or don't, this movie was just a phenomenal story about a girl who grows up in an orphanage and learns how to play chess at a really early age from this guy she meets. It sounds kind of weird, but the janitor at the orphanage she lives in plays chess in his little office in the basement. She stumbles across him and wants to learn, and he teaches her. She grows up to be just a massive chess player, but she also struggles with a really bad drug and alcohol addiction, so it's kind of her fighting this while also maintaining, being a reigning chess champion and trying to become the best in the world. This movie was great, and also I'm a big fan of Anya Taylor-Joy now. I know I've seen her in things like The Witch and New Mutants, and she's been in a bunch of stuff, but she really showed some range and some chops in this movie, and it was just, in this show rather, really fantastic show. It had a lot of heart. The story was really good. The characters were engaging. They really found a way to make chess games really suspenseful. I know, like, chess fans are probably like, oh, fuck you, dudes. Chess is cool. And it is. But to direct a chess game and make it suspenseful, and it's not like directing a football game or a basketball game, to where you have a bunch of exciting crowd interaction stuff. It's 2 people sitting at a table playing chess, but they did a good job with making it seem really interesting. I would highly recommend The Queen's Gambit. I had a lot of fun with it. Next, another movie that really, really surprised me. I remember seeing trailers for this when it first came out, and I thought it looked really interesting, and I really didn't know what to expect with it. And upon watching it, for me personally, I ended up getting some of what was advertised in the trailer, but really the movie is a lot different than what it's advertised as, and I think maybe that's why it didn't do as well. You don't hear as many people talk about it, because although there is a lot of really cool fantasy elements, like what they're showing on the poster and what they show in the trailer, those elements are in there, but it's really more of a coming of age story, and it's really kind of really heartbreaking and sad at some points. But the movie's really at its core about a young girl dealing with loss and grief, and it's done in just a really, really cool way. I would really recommend I Kill Giants. I actually ended up purchasing the movie on Blu-ray. I loved it so much. I would definitely recommend I Kill Giants. Have some tissues ready, okay? It's a little sad, so happy sad though, almost, okay? Emily, this was a fun movie. A better premise than an outcome once you get to the end of the movie, but I would actually recommend this one if you want a good little watch. Like I said, I'm pretty stingy with my stars. I gave this one 2.5 out of 5, but ultimately I would say that it would be worth a rewatch for me. Basically, a family is looking for a babysitter as their normal babysitter follows through, so they pick up Emily to come and watch their kids, and Emily may or may not be what she seems. Okay, watch out for Emily. A really good performance from the actress who plays Emily, I almost said bass player.
Slapping the bass, man. Slapping that bass, man.
Slapping the bass. The babysitter, she was really, really good and sort of creepy. I don't want to give away too much, but this movie took some really cool twists and turns, and character motivations that are revealed later in the movie are actually pretty cool. Crazy, but I actually felt like something like this could kind of happen. Ultimately, I would recommend Emily. Next up, Creepshow animated special. This one I had a lot of fun with. I'll admit I'm not the biggest fan of animated stuff other than like classic animated Disney stuff that I grew up with, Sword in the Stone and Lion King and shit like that. But the animation style and the segments in this were actually really, really cool. Shudder rebooted the Creepshow series. If you hadn't seen, it's produced by Greg Nicotero. That's kind of his baby, and it's really, really good. So they had a Creepshow animated special. It consists of 2 stories, kind of split the movie up in half. I think it's only 45 minutes or so. Yeah, 46 minutes. But ultimately, I had a really good time with this. The first one is a shipwreck story where this guy, voiced by Kiefer Sutherland, is trapped on an island and he's forced to survive, and he takes some really, really desperate measures to survive. I'll leave it at that. And the second story involves a young girl and her family traveling, going on vacation in a road trip in a vehicle, and they take a sidestep, take this side road and come across this like carnival circus deal, a traveling circus, and end up becoming a part of the show. And I'm not going to elaborate any further. I'll let you see on your own, but ultimately it was very entertaining. I really enjoyed the animated special. Next up, Good Dick. So this movie was written and directed by a girl named Mariana Palka. She also did another movie that's later on this list. I absolutely fell in love with the 2 movies that I watched this month of hers. The first being Good Dick and the second one being Bitch. What a unique voice this woman has. She's also an actress. You've probably seen her in a couple things. I'll put a couple of her projects in here. But Good Dick is about a guy, Jason Ritter, who works in a video store with him and his buddies, and this girl comes in who rents like adult movies, but she never says anything. She's like kind of unkempt, her hair's in her face. She comes in, rents her movies, and walk out. This guy has a big crush on her, and he eventually kind of takes some creepy measures to kind of hunt her down and meet her at her apartment. She wants nothing to do with him, and they slowly kind of become intertwined. I know when I'm saying that, it sounds kind of predictable and like a usual like kind of romantic style comedy thing. I assure you, this movie's not that. It has a lot more edge and a lot more depth than your normal romantic comedy. It goes to some darker places as far as these characters struggling to kind of overcome their own bullshit. I highly recommend Good Dick. I promise it's not what you're expecting. I remember this movie came out when I worked at Blockbuster, and I looked at it week after week because I had 5 free rentals a week when I worked there, and I always passed on this one. And finally, like 12 years later, I watched it, and it's like, god damn, what a fantastic movie. Next up, the Poughkeepsie Tapes. This one I gave 3 stars, more so for the filmmaking and writing aspect. The subject matter is just deals with a lot of things that I'm just kind of growing tired as I get older. These torture movies, just for torture's sake, don't do a lot for me without a decent story behind it. And even then, it's hard to justify some of the things that happen in movies like this. Ultimately, you have a driver's seat view, a POV of this guy who has hundreds of tapes that are discovered by the FBI. He's basically a serial killer, and he keeps girls trapped in his basement, and it's basically like a series of snuff films. It does take some interesting turns that I haven't seen in found footage movies like this, but just keep in mind that if like watching like women get just tortured and just killed, like if that bothers you in any way, especially in movies, that's kind of what the whole movie is. That's kind of what the whole movie is, watching tape after tape of people getting tortured and killed, and the story ultimately isn't that compelling. So it's like I just felt like, why am I watching this a couple times? Kind of like I Spit on Your Grave and things like that. Like, the means to the end, it just doesn't do a lot for me. I wouldn't really recommend Poughkeepsie Tapes. Now, Bitch is another movie I will recommend. That goes, this was done by that director who did Good Dick that I was telling you about. This was such an original movie. God, I wish that Hollywood and the film industry would take more chances on risky movies like this, because I absolutely fell in love with this movie and these characters. Again, two characters portrayed by Jason Ritter and Mariana Palka. I hope I'm saying her name right. The husband is kind of detached, a workaholic. His wife is taking care of everything and burning the candles at both ends, and she's just slowly unraveling. So ultimately, she has a mental breakdown, and the way that she chooses to escape and deal with this bullshit that's going on is she literally takes the personality of a dog to the point where they have to lock her in the basement. She's snarling, she's covered in dirt, she's naked in the basement, barking and growling at people. And it was done in such a, I know that sounds ridiculous, the way that they handled filming it and showing us a perspective of the mother character as this dog, it just worked. I don't know how they did it, but it worked by keeping the shots really tight on her face and kind of keeping her minimally seen in the shadows. It was really believable, but it didn't take itself too seriously. The movie has a lot of humor, so it's more like a dark comedy satire type of vibe. The performances are great. The story's awesome. I cannot recommend Bitch and Good Dick enough. I think they're independent movies that a lot of people should really see. I really highly recommend Bitch. Oh, Black Christmas. Here we go. Black Christmas. This movie was man, what a drag watching this movie was. Uninspired, unoriginal, so pushy in its message that with just 0% subtlety. Not that these type of messages have to be like buried in metaphor or anything. I understand what they were trying to do, but I imagine even the audience that this movie was meant for probably felt a little bit insulted, felt that their intelligence was insulted, that ideas that they're pushing in this movie have to be boiled down and thrown in your face in such an exaggerated and deliberate way. Oh my God, everything you've heard about this movie is true. I watched it just purely out of curiosity. I was like, it can't be that bad. It can't be. And ultimately it was. Don't watch Black Christmas. Next up, Session 9. This is another movie that I have heard about for years that people said was like the best movie since sliced bread. And ultimately, it was okay. Basically, the story follows a crew of guys who go into this old insane asylum to clean hazardous materials out of it. And ultimately, the spirits of a couple of these things start influencing the people and influencing their actions. And people start to lose their minds a little bit. The building was really cool that they were in. There was some cool atmospheric shots. The performances were okay. What is it? Warren from Empire Records was in it, so it was kind of cool to see him be in another movie again. But ultimately, and I really want to know what you guys think of all these movies too, but this one fell a little flat for me. It didn't really do much for me. By the end of it, I was like, okay, a little predictable. I don't know. Not a big fan of Session 9. Knives Out by Rian Johnson. This movie I absolutely loved. I cannot recommend Knives Out enough. What a breath of fresh air as far as all the movies that have been coming out. I'm glad Rian Johnson came back and did a little bit smaller production rather than his massive, the stuff that he does. Rian Johnson also had a cool early filmography with films like Brick. He has a really good knack for kind of noirish mystery movies, and he kind of went back to a murder mystery with this one. The movie starts out with the father of all the characters in this movie is a really successful fiction novel writer. He's a novelist, and he's built this massive empire, and all his kids are leeching off of him, and they're all gathered for his birthday party, I believe, and he ends up, the dad character, the author guy, ends up dying, and the whole movie is trying to figure out who killed the dad. And it takes a really, really interesting angle with this, being that they kind of, and this isn't a spoiler, they kind of reveal what happens fairly early in the movie, but it plays out, and that's what kind of gives the movie an edge, is that it gives you, is that after they kind of tell you what happens, you find out how they dealt with it. And while simultaneously watching everybody else scramble to figure out who... and I don't want to spoil anything. I know I'm being so vague, but I highly recommend Knives Out if you haven't seen it. That was a kind of a terrible explanation of that movie, but it's really complex and it's kind of hard to explain. There's so many characters, and the story is really like complicated. So you just kind of have to watch it. Next up, Knock Knock, directed by Eli Roth. I have a lot of fun every time I watch this movie. Keanu Reeves puts on a really fun performance. A little hammy at times, to be honest with you, but basically Keanu Reeves' wife goes out of town, so he's left to his own devices at his house. These two beautiful young girls show up in the rain looking to use the phone. They end up kind of seducing him into doing some things that he probably shouldn't have done, that he soon regrets because the girls will not leave. They're blowing up his spot, fucking up his whole life, and they won't leave his house, and ultimately kind of, yeah, I would recommend Knock Knock. It's a really, really fun time. I really had a good time with this movie. Next up, The Vineyard. I picked up this Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome for their halfway to Black Friday sale, and finally got around to watching it. And a lot of the Vinegar Syndrome movies that I've gotten are these blind buys, and I'm like, I hope they're good. And ultimately, this is pretty much what I expected. A really low budget, kind of not low budget horror comedy. This guy who's been in like every single movie plays a guy who's trying to he makes this wine elixir at his vineyard, but he has to harvest the powers of people, so he brings people out, and the guy's like a vineyard tour, and he ends up killing them to fuel his like wine fountain of youth elixir. It was ultimately pretty fun, super, super low budget and cheesy, but it's worth a watch if you're into like super low budget 80s cheese. Pretty good time. Next up, Pilgrim. This is part of a movie series that premiered on Hulu. This was a Thanksgiving horror film about this wife who's trying to bring her family together by having this kind of like harvest festival Thanksgiving celebration. So she brings in these two like pilgrim reenactors who come, and they're supposed to just kind of come over for a day and kind of cook them dinner and teach them what to be thankful for. And they're all in character, wearing the buckles on their shoes and talking all like old timey and shit. Something happens. They end up staying there for a few days. We have to really kind of suspend your disbelief as to why she would allow these people to stay in their home. But as these type of movies go, these pilgrims may not be who they say they are. And ultimately, it's a horror movie, so I won't give anything else. But pretty interesting little movie. It was pretty short. It was only like an hour and 20 minutes, so I would recommend it. It's a pretty decent little movie. Next up, The Undoing. This was an HBO Max original miniseries murder mystery. Basically, somebody is killed at the beginning of the movie. Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant live this sort of like idyllic, rich Manhattan lifestyle, and this murder throws their entire life in the fucking blender, and her husband is blamed for this murder. So basically, it's red herring after red herring. You don't know who did it. They keep on inching at the fact that it could have been this person, it could have been this person. The murder itself is really gnarly. The effects that they used to, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's some good gore effects. It's not a horror series by any means. It's a mystery thriller, and you really don't know who did it until the very last episode. And there was a lot of speculation and a lot of like people being happy or unhappy ultimately with the outcome of the show. So if you want to watch it, I wouldn't Google anything about it because you'll spoil it for yourself. But if you're into kind of like cheeky, schlocky murder mysteries, you'll probably dig this. Nicole Kidman looks fantastic for her age. She really does. Her face doesn't move a lot anymore, but she looks really great, and she still put on a good performance. Donald Sutherland's old ass is in this, looking like Nosferatu, but like ultimately gives a really, really good performance. I shouldn't talk about him like that. He's a good dude. I loved him in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Body Snatchers. But next up, Trauma. This goes under that category of like I Spit on Your Grave, the Poughkeepsie Tapes movies that I don't get a lot out of, but some of these movies have just been floating around. Like, I've been so curious about them for so long, I just had to watch them out of pure curiosity. Now, this movie, Trauma, is 100% absolute exploitation, just disgustingness all the way through. Like, if you don't like really explicit sexual violence, do not watch this movie. This movie like goes to level 10 and then it pushes it through the ceiling to like level 15 as far as rape, torture, like sadistic, horrible shit done to people. there is a story, and the production values are really pretty high for a movie like this. The acting's pretty good. At the end, it's just, you're kind of just left like, you kind of just want the movie to be over a little bit, because the story just isn't that compelling. There's nobody to root for in the movie by the end of it. If you're into watching super extreme cinema and you seek out all of the extreme movies, this is one that's going to be at the top of the list. And like, I still find myself watching these movies out of pure curiosity. So if you're into that type of flick, watch Trauma, but keep in mind this movie takes it to the next level from like minute one. Okay, so next up, the most hated woman in America. What was her name? Madeline O'Hare. I had no idea about this story. This is based on a true story about the starting of the Atheist Group of America or something. She was like a pioneer in separating church and state as far as like prayer and church and schools. And it's about her kidnapping, and I won't spoil anything. And if you Google anything about this movie, it's going to spoil it if you don't know anything about this story, which I didn't. I think it's a pretty big story. I probably should have known more about it, but I was unaware. Ultimately, this movie suffers for me in tone. I felt like what was happening in the movie should have been handled not super seriously, but they almost tried to make it like this quirky comedy. And it just didn't quite work for me. But if I were you, I would just watch a really good documentary done on the subject. I think I would have got a lot more out of it, because cinematically, it's just kind of a dud. But the story is really, really fascinating. Couple fan films here. I'm going to lump these together. Never Hike in the Snow and Happy Halloween, Kills fan film. These were really, really well-made fan films, which you can both find in their entirety for free on YouTube if you go right now. So go check those out. Jason in the Snow here. Now, these are, even though they're not involved by the producers and like they're not technically canon, being like involved with the actual filmmakers and the people who hold the rights to these movies, they are in canon in the fact that they use some of the same actors, the storylines, they follow canon of Friday the 13th, but they're not officially sequels or not officially involved with the franchise. But some of the acting is questionable, but honestly, for fan films and made independently, they're pretty fucking good. This and Happy Halloween. There's a handful of kills in both of these that are fucking fantastic, that rival any kills in the original movies. And I mean that. That's dead serious. They did a really good job. So I recommend that. Oh, you can see the first December watch there on my December. We'll talk about that in the next What I Watched video. And finally, Run, starring Sarah Paulson and a young girl named Chloe. This movie was a lot of fun. I think a little backstory about me watching this. I was watching this movie and I got distracted for a second, so I Googled something. What I thought was just a really small, just little piece of a plot element that I missed. But when I Googled it, I ruined the entire ending and basically the entire reveal for this movie. So watching Run, don't Google anything about it. Just go into the movie and watch it. Don't look up anything about it. Basically, this young girl, she's paraplegic. She lives with her mom, Sarah Paulson's character, and she's about to go to college. Her mom is really sad to see her go. The young girl finds out something about her mom, that her mom may not have been as fully honest with her about some very important things that ultimately changed the course of her entire life. So going into this movie, like I said, don't Google anything, just go right into it. I would recommend it. It's not the best movie I've ever seen, but Sarah Paulson is so watchable. She is such a fantastic actress. I would recommend watching anything she's in. She's just great. So guys, that is it. I actually re-recorded this fucking video to make it a little bit shorter, and I cannot keep this video under a half an hour. I watched so much shit this month. So I don't know. Maybe I need to make these 2-part series or something. I don't know. But let me know below in the comments what you thought about these titles. Did you watch any of them? Are you planning to watch any of these? I definitely recommend getting Shudder. Fantastic service. Get on Letterboxd. You can follow me on there. I'll leave my Letterboxd in my link tree down below where all my socials are. But yeah, that's what I watched. I hope this helped you guys find some new movies and TV shows to watch based on these recommendations. I'm going to do these every month. I'm a few days late on this one. I've been busy, so I didn't have time to film this. But watch my other videos, like this video, subscribe, all that bullshit, guys. Thank you so much. Until next time, stay weird, and I'll see ya. Bye.
I love movies. Gosh, I love movies. I love watching them, and I love making them.